We'll get started. My name is Gary Soretsky. I'm the president of the Princeton Preservation Group. Uh, in case you're unfamiliar with PPG, we've been meeting for more than 40 years, initially in person and since the pandemic on Zoom, on a wide variety of topics related to preservation. Uh, a very wide variety, I should say. But one topic which we have not had before is the conservation of silver. And so I'm particularly pleased to welcome our speaker, Ingrid Neumann, a senior conservator at Rhode Island School of Design, where she's been for the past 18 years. This meeting will be recorded and a video will be available on our website in the list of meetings. Uh, and you'll see the date, the speaker, the topic, and then there'll be a link to the video, which will be on YouTube. Our meeting coordinator, Melissa Zobro, is not speaking this evening because she's very busy installing an exhibit as part of her role as curator of the Bruce Springsteen Museum of American Music. She's installing a wonderful exhibit in Boston that's been traveling around the country, and she's very tied up at the moment with that. But she's got our meeting started, and I'll introduce Ingrid. Ingrid, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak tonight on silver, one of my favorite topics. And I guess the way I'll organize the presentation is I will present, and then if we could just hold the questions till the end, because hopefully I'll answer a lot of your questions, throughout the presentation, but I'm happy to entertain them at the end for sure.
Ingrid,
And
I'll just also say if you have questions, you could put them in the chat too, at the
yes.
bottom. And whenever you're ready to share screen, we'll get your slide presentation.
Okay, I'll do that right now. See if everyone can see it. How does that look? Let's
That
see.
looks great.
Okay,
It's just fine.
wonderful. Well, so tonight I'll be speaking on silver and its sterling reputation, the intricacies of caring for silver collections. And here featured, just on the front slide is various things you might have in your museum collection, or possibly in your own home, of jewelry, coins. And on the left is a collection of Gorham silver from Rhode Island, with which I'm quite familiar. I wanted to start off with like, what is silver? We use that term a lot, and it's a precious metal. It's one of 8 precious metals: gold, silver, platinum, palladium, rhodium, iridium, osmium, and ruthenium. It is very sensitive to reacting to gases in the air, gases that you can't really see, including sulfur. So that's one of the big ones that silver reacts with. Silver is also fairly soft, so it is easily scratched. You probably know that from any jewelry you have or any silverware that you might have. It's also very malleable or bendable. And because it is so soft, it is often alloyed with copper, which makes it harder. So that is what we call an alloy. An alloy is a combination of metals. Let's see. Oh, it's not advancing. Interesting. Hmm. I wonder if there's a reason why it's not advancing. Um,
Try your down arrow key, Ingrid.
yes, I'm doing the down and the side arrow.
How about
Hmm.
the space bar?
Ah, nope, no action. Is that something you can control from your end?
No. I suggest
Hey,
that
I'm here. Can I help with anything?
These slides are not advancing.
Okay, that is not something we can do on our end, unfortunately. Perhaps you want to stop your screen share and then try again.
Yeah,
Sure.
it may have something to do with how you start the slideshow. If you go to start from the beginning in the pull down menu.
Sure. Let's see. Okay, I'm sorry for this. Um, hmm, so seems to have
Let's go back to
frozen.
share and start again.
Yes. Um,
You were off to a great start, though, Ingrid.
I, let's see.
Go to share first, so you got to get you back on, get your slideshow back up.
Right. So here we go. Try it again. Okay, that was the first slide. It's not advancing. Hmm. I've never had this problem before. One
Yeah,
second.
it's odd. If you can advance one, you should be able to advance them all.
Just talk amongst yourselves for a moment while I try to sort this out.
When you're in at your when you open up the program, the slide program, then you want to,
Yes.
there's a pull down where you can say start the slideshow from the first slide
Yes, from beginning.
from beginning, right? That's the one that you
Yes.
probably want.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
we've gotten a few more people since we had the false start, so
Okay.
it's probably a good thing that you're going back to the beginning. I
Yes.
want to welcome the people who just joined us. This is the Princeton Preservation Group meeting. I'm Gary Soretsky, the president. We've been meeting for 40 years, more than 40 years, on a wide variety of topics, and tonight we're going to hear about the conservation of silver. Okay, now you see under
Ah, there we go.
okay,
All right. Brilliant. Everything's
working
fine
now.
now.
Okay.
So just to recap, silver is a precious metal, one of eight. It's very reactive to sulfur, so that's something to remember. It's also very soft, and we're going to talk about how that impacts the care of the silver. And it's an alloy because, well, silver specifically is a precious element, but it is often alloyed with copper. So where does silver come from? I actually hail from, my parents hail from Idaho, which was a or is a silver mining town. And so I'm very familiar with silver. It's in my blood, so to speak. It comes from rocks. It's an ore in its pure state, and it's mined around the world, but especially in Mexico, Peru, the United States, and Canada. Silver is tricky though, because silver has a lot of lookalikes. In the museum, we call them white metals. And so you might assume something is silver, which could get you in trouble when I talk later about cleaning silver, because there's also zinc and nickel, aluminum, tin, pewter, speculum, and tumbaga. And these are all white metals. And so pewter, for instance, I'll just point that out, and you can see an image in the slide. Um, it forms kind of um, an oxidized layer that cannot really be polished. You can't really polish pewter. And so if you thought something was silver, but it was actually pewter, it would be very frustrating because you wouldn't get that high shine you might be looking for. So it behooves, a collections care person to research and understand that there are all of these sort of white metals. And there's also silver plating, which is a thin layer over another kind of metal substrate. And we'll discuss that and how cleaning and polishing silver plated metals can be very tricky because you can actually remove the plating over time if you polish too much or on a regular basis. So here's Nicole Risdy with a giant silver Gorham teapot that she has on her cart there. And I wanted to mention that you've probably come across all these different kinds of silver. There's Britannia silver, Mexican silver, sterling silver, coin silver, German silver, Sheffield plate, vermeil, which is a gilded silver, and even EPBM and EPNS, which are electroplated versions of silver. But tonight we're mostly going to talk about sterling silver, which technically is 92.5% silver and 7.5% copper. And the copper, again, like I mentioned at the very beginning, makes the silver harder so that it's not as malleable and as prone to scratches and dents and things like that. But you should be aware of these other kinds of silver because they have, um, there's reasons to understand them more because of how you might treat them or clean them that we'll be getting into. And German silver itself actually doesn't contain any silver. So it's a misnomer or it's a little bit um, confusing. It's actually an alloy of copper, nickel, and zinc. So on sterling, 'cause that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, you often find purity marks, maker's marks, assay marks, and a date letter. So these are all like little clues, and you can buy books or go online to find out what they all mean. And they're really fun because some of them, as you can see here on the slide, are like little lions or anchors, things like that, that are codes for dates and the purity of the silver. And you become familiar with them over time. But it's a good sign, you know, if you were to turn over a piece of silver and find these marks, that's a very good sign that you're dealing with sterling silver. So how hard actually is silver metal? There's something called the Mohs hardness scale, which you might be familiar with, diamond being a 10 or considered the hardest surface, and talc being a 1. So it spans from 1 to 10. And on this scale called Mohs hardness scale, silver is about a 2.5 or 3. So it's about the same hardness as calcite and a little softer than a copper penny. So it's very prone to scratching. And the key here is once you know the hardness of the silver, you know that you can't use anything harder than 2.5 or 3 to clean the silver because you'll scratch it. So, for instance, you would never use a diamond to clean silver or anything on this list here, fluorite, apatite, all these minerals to clean silver. Or when you think about it, like steel wool or something like that, because steel is harder. So, we're going to talk about what you can use and why. There are a lot of implications of cleaning silver. People like to, I think humans like to clean things, but in the museum, you know, we have to consider what we're doing very carefully because we're the custodians for the artwork or the silver for maybe 25 years, a generation, and then it's passed on to someone else. And these artifacts, artworks are going to live well beyond our own lives. So they're going to have this exponential life. And uh, you don't want to be over cleaning the metal. For instance, like with the Sheffield plate that I talked about, you wouldn't want to keep cleaning the silver and then only have copper left, for instance. And it might not be immediately obvious when you purchase something or find something in your collection if it is plated. So that's why you want to look underneath at the indications. So you always use a softer material than the metal itself so as to avoid scratches. And that behooves you to know the components of your cleaning materials. The components can be listed or usually are listed in the MSDS sheet, which is a material safety data sheet. Now it's called an SDS sheet, safety data sheet. But sometimes, we're going to get into this about commercial products. Sometimes businesses will not list the components of the ingredients of the material because it's considered a trade secret and they can get around it that way. So you don't really know what you're dealing with. So in the museum, we like to use precipitated calcium carbonate, which is like a chalk. So it's very soft, similar to talc, so it's very low on Mohs hardness scale. And in specific, we like to purchase precipitated or fine calcium carbonate. And the reason is because then all of the particles have equal size, and that reduces any scratching, in theory, of the surface. So, issues with silver collections. Many people get these terms kind of confused, and they are interrelated. They're similar but different. So corrosion, oxidation, and tarnish. Those are all terms that people use when they're talking about silver. But corrosion is technically the formation of metal oxides. Oxidation is, very naturally occurring. It means when oxygen actually interacts with the surface of the metal. So you might get something like tarnish, right? The darkening of the silver that sometimes people don't want and want it to be shinier. But you have to remember that every time silver is cleaned, silver metal is being removed. You're abrading the surface, you're taking the silver away. So that's one thing if your silver is very pure, like sterling silver. But if it's plated again, eventually you're going to remove all the plating and you're going to be left with copper. And you've probably seen this with candlesticks. A lot of people might have silver plated candlesticks at home and they polish them during the holidays or something like that. And over time, they're going to become pinker and pinker because it's the copper that's showing through and you're not seeing any more silver. So we call this a destructive or subtractive process. And that's why we don't like to do it all the time. We're very careful. We only clean or polish before exhibits. We don't clean or polish before we put things away into storage. So that's generally how we operate. So here are some examples from the RISD Museum collection. On the left is a wonderful spider web made out of sterling silver linkages, and that was polished, with the precipitated calcium carbonate. And on the right is a really terrific traveling picnic set made out of sterling silver, which I'm sure was, there were few and far between. But you can see how tarnished it's become. And that is because, I believe, because the fabric that's lining this leather case is velvet, and velvet inherently has sulfur in it. So remember, sulfur. Sulfur is an issue. You can't do anything really about oxygen. We have to breathe. We all have to breathe. So there's oxygen in the air, and we have oxygen in our museums, but we can try to filter out sulfur because that's not something we need to have in the museum. And we do that with filtration, HVAC systems, and other means, which I'll talk about. So here's good examples of tarnish. Here on the left is an ancient coin, Greek coin. And on the upper right, you'll see some John Pripp sterling silver salt and pepper shakers. The lower right, there's a chair, a Gorham chair, leather chair that has, together the desk and the chair have 70 pounds of silver integrated into the chair and desk. Not your average chair and desk, that's for sure. And then you have this sort of souvenir spoons which a lot of museums have, and we'll talk about those too. So why does silver tarnish? I mean, basically, I've already kind of given away. It's oxygen, oxygen in the air. It's sulfur. Where does the sulfur come from? There's a lot of reasons, in industrial areas. So if your museum's located in a more industrial area as opposed to a more country-oriented area, there would be a lot of sulfur in the air. There's also food sources like eggs, onions, mayonnaise. Um, Hopefully you're not eating in your storage areas or anything like that. But if you were eating an egg sandwich with mayonnaise and onions, there'd be a lot of sulfur that would be emitted from those materials. There's a lot of other kind of office materials, latex bands, rubber bands, have sulfur in them, and museum collections themselves have sulfur. Ebonite, you're probably familiar with ebonite jewelry, and there's adhesives, for instance, that have sulfur in them. A lot of fabrics, wool and silk are examples, and I'm sure you all have wool and silk garments in your collection. And then some paints. So the sulfur is all around us, so it's a matter of filtering it out, and how do you protect the silver from looking like this mirror on the right here in this image. And we'll get into some very specific things that you can do to protect your silver. But what about RH, relative humidity? How does the humidity in the air also affect the formation of tarnish? And that's a very good question, because not all museums or historical societies have HVAC systems, right? Heating, ventilating, air conditioning systems. Some of the museums and some galleries and historical societies wouldn't have that, so they'd be prone or vulnerable to high levels of relative humidity. And certainly in New England and in New Jersey, where I'm sure some of your members are located, there is high humidity, in the summer and so forth, which is not great for silver. Um, Organic materials do okay with higher humidity because they like to, they're organic and they swell and contract and so forth. But metal really benefits from a 30 to 40% relative humidity, and that's including silver. So all metals really like a lower relative humidity. So we'll talk about how you can do that with silica gel, for instance. So, but protecting silver on the very basic level, you want to always wear gloves. We don't always wear gloves in the museum when we're handling paper or textiles. We often use only clean hands. But with metals, you must wear gloves. So you can see here on the left image, there's a really nice fingerprint that's been etched into the silver. And that is not something that's easily removable. That would require some serious um, abrasion, I should say, to remove that. And it's an issue, and that would never have happened should the person who ever handled it without gloves, if they wore cotton gloves or nitrile gloves. That's what we'd recommend in the museum. And someday I always joke that maybe there'll be a machine, maybe a machine already exists with the FBI or something, where you could figure out whose fingerprint that was, because they're really, really difficult to remove. So there are debates over which type of glove to use, whether nitrile or cotton. I prefer cotton myself. I think they're much more comfortable. You can wash them. I'm not a huge fan of wearing the nitrile ones. I find they're kind of uncomfortable after a while. Like I said, depends, how much perspiration your hands emit. And also there's the fact of recycling the gloves. Some companies do recycle gloves, but you have to have like a certain number of tons in order to have them recycled. So we can talk about that later in the question and answer period. But either way, if you can wear gloves, there are these sterling gray gloves that are actually specifically made for silver. And then cotton gloves are absolutely fine as well. So fingerprints, I'm just going to drill this in a little bit, drill in a little deeper to this. Your hand is actually a perfect electrolyte. You have perspiration on your hand, right? You sweat, everyone sweats, and that's salt that's on your hands. And in that salt that is then transferred to the silver becomes silver chloride, and it will darken over time. It takes a while. And certainly, if by accident someone touches a piece of silver, if you were to buff it off with cotton right away, that's fine. But over the years, it just absolutely becomes very difficult to remove unless you take it down to almost, the original surface layer. Galvanic corrosion is another term that you might not be aware of, but I think it is relevant here, and it involves two dissimilar metals. So if you have a silver item that's touching another metallic item, but it's not silver, those two metals are going to be kind of at odds with one another. And the one that will win or not corrode is higher up on this galvanic scale. So when you think about, say, if you had a jewelry box and you put a gold ring and a silver ring in the box and they were touching each other, they're two different metals. And the gold metal is much more noble and it's not going to corrode, as you know. I mean, gold doesn't, but the silver would. Or say you have even a bronze ring or um, a silver ring or maybe even stainless steel, and you put them together, if they're touching, the one that is lower, least noble, lower down on the scale will corrode first. And that's why we don't like to overlap metals. But sometimes you have that in an artwork like this sword here that I'm showing. You'll see two metals together, and that's a bit of inherent vice because they're always going to be reacting to one another. And so it's just something to be aware of. Another really important aspect about silver is that there's something called niello, which is a very beautiful silver sulfide. It's a black material. And you might think it looks like tarnish, and you might think, oh, I should polish that away. It's all black. But that's an intentional paste that artists use to enhance their designs. So in this case, you can see this brooch, silver, and then the niello is like a background. So you would never want to polish the niello away. And you just want to be aware that niello exists and that it's something that the artist intentionally applied. Another I'm telling you about all these things that keep me up at night, basically. Another thing is called fire scale. If any of you have ever made jewelry or know someone that makes jewelry, fire scale is a darkening of silver metal. It almost looks like little spots that you want to tarnish away. You can see it here in this image on the right. Fire scale is something that's inherent to the silver, to the manufacturing. It occurs over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's below the superficial metal surface. You can't polish it away, and you might become very frustrated because you think, well, I'm doing all these things. I'm using the precipitated chalk and so forth, and it's not going away. Well, you won't be able to polish that away. That's just inherent, and you have to live with it. And I was polishing, for instance, some teapots and sort of a coffee service just yesterday. And I noticed that after I removed the superficial tarnish, there were some kind of blotches on the surface. And that was definitely fire scale. And that's just inherent to the manufacturing technique. And vermeil, I need to mention vermeil. We've worked on so much at the RISD Museum because of our Gorham collection, which is quite extensive. We have 2,200 pieces. And vermeil is a very beautiful technique that a lot of silversmiths use to put a superficial layer of gold on top of the silver, because that way you won't have to polish it and you can put food in it. And it's very nice. In this case, you can see in this image, you could have cascading bunches of grapes or something like that in this dish and not worry about any tarnish occurring. So now we're going to get into cleaning, and I've listed 10 questions you would ask yourself or discuss with the curator or director or whomever you're working with about why you're cleaning in the first place. You know, like who actually wants the tarnish or oxidation to be removed? What kind of oxidation is present? You know, is it corrosion or how heavy is it? What is the aesthetic effect that you either do like or don't like? Um, why should the tarnish be removed? You have to be careful. There's certain cultural groups that and religious paraphernalia, religious items that you might find in a church or synagogue or a place of worship that you might actually not want to polish, depending on the practices of that particular religion. You would want to think about when was the last time the silver was cleaned, because, as I said, you don't want to be cleaning and polishing the silver like every year, something like that. You would only want to polish before an exhibition occurs. And I will be talking a lot about Gorham and how we had to actually start cleaning the Gorham silver 3 years in advance of the exhibit. And then we had to protect it in order that we didn't have to repolish it right before the show opened. So you want to think about the who, what, why, when, how. What are the risks involved? Do you have the proper cleaning materials? Do you have, the people to help you? Do you have the time? And what is the desired result that you're really looking for? Do you want it to be so shiny or just partially shiny? What is the cultural, expectation? What is the expectation of the curator? There's a lot of discussions that need to occur, because once you remove the tarnish, of course, it will re-oxidize, but that can take a long time. So say you over clean the silver, you might be in a bit of a time jam, because if you need it to re-oxidize a little bit. So we're going to talk about the best dry methods and what the best wet methods are. So a lot of people ask about commercial products and what they can use from their local hardware store or their local grocery store. And the issue I have with a lot of these proprietary materials, we call them, is that, first of all, you can't always find out what's in them because of the trade secrets. Very often they do contain thiourea acid. That's a typical acid that's used for like dip and stripping. These things are not good for the environment and they're not good for your health. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. And if there is silicone, for instance, in the material, in the concoction as an ingredient, silicone is really tricky because they put it in car wax and things like that. But if you have silicone in the solution that you're using to clean, it's going to leave a silicone residue, which will be really hard to get off ever. And it may be very splotchy, and you'll never get really an even surface again. Silicone is really hard to remove. It's very permanent. I think maybe you can use hot toluene or something, which is flammable, and I wouldn't recommend it. So these are some of the reasons why we do not recommend a lot of the proprietary solutions you can get in the store. This is an example of one of my local hardware stores and all of the available items. Um, there is there are cyanide. Sometimes there's some cyanide that is included in some of these ingredients. So again, we're just trying to get away from all these chemicals, not good for the environment, not good for your health. And we're going to go with the precipitated calcium carbonate. Um, some people also ask me about these home remedies like baking soda and aluminum foil, baking soda paste, lemon juice and salt, toothpaste, vinegar and baking soda, and beer. These are all ways that people clean their metals and silver, and it's sort of documented maybe on YouTube and places like that. And, it's fine if you want to do that to your home items, things at home. But tonight we're talking about how we operate in the museum. So I'm not going to be advocating any of those materials. Um, and as I mentioned briefly, before you start cleaning items, you see here coins, Native American jewelry, you need to consider the cultural context because you want to consult with the stakeholders because some people feel that silver is often over cleaned. It looks too bright and shiny. It wasn't, originally worn that way. I know with coins, for instance, often cleaning or polishing coins reduces their value. So that's something you want to think about very carefully. So the first step would be to dust, and you actually dust the silver before you clean it. And that is because dust, I'm showing you a scanning electron microscope slide of dust, which looks like, I don't know, what does it look like? Like spaghetti and algae and something you might find in the ocean. But dust on a microscopic level looks like that. And it is hygroscopic. It attracts moisture. So if you think about it, if you have a dusty house like I do, um, the dust on every single item in your house is actually kind of covered in a layer of water because dust attracts moisture. So every little particle of dust is like a little bubble of water. So, as you can imagine, that would not be a good thing for metals, right? To have all that water on top of your metal because you could cause corrosion. So that's why we like to dust things first. And dust is very abrasive. What's in dust? It's like pollen and soot and all these things. So silica, like sand, basically, silica. So if you're polishing your metal before you actually remove the dust, you might be grinding in all of these abrasives. So just suffice it to say you should dust your metal first. And so here's an example of my assistant, Brianna, doing some dry polishing. This is one method you could try first. These claws are readily available, on Amazon, online, and at most jewelry stores. It's a two-part cloth, right? The red cloth is embedded with clay particles, which is a very mild abrasive. That sounds like an oxymoron, a mild abrasive, but the clay particles do a nice job of removing the tarnish. And then the yellow flannel is more of just a polishing cloth. And these cloths are quite inexpensive. I think they're between, $5 or so, $5 or $7. So not a bad price. They last forever. And you don't wash them, but you just reuse them. And I actually put them on sticks on bamboo skewers and put double-sided tape on the skewers and make little, almost like just little what am I trying to say, toothpicks that can get into interstices and clean these uh, corroded areas better. But should the dry method not work that well for you, then you can graduate to the wet polishing method, which is using the precipitated calcium carbonate in ethanol or distilled water. And distilled water is readily available, like at a CVS or Walgreens, and it's only about $1 and something a gallon, so it's very affordable too. Ethanol will be a little bit more expensive. You could probably use isopropanol, which is also available, rubbing alcohol, which is also available in drugstores. And you make a slurry that's similar to skim milk. So on the left, you can see tarnish on the edges of those knives, and on the right, you can see the circular motion, the cleaning using a bamboo skewer, which are very strong. We love bamboo skewers. They're very hardy and they last forever. And then using cotton and basically rolling your own sort of Q-tips, basically. So here's an example of 2 forks on the left, 2 spoons on the right, and each image shows an oxidized or tarnished example. Like the fork on the left is before treatment, and the fork on the right is after treatment, and that's done with the precipitated chalk. Now, a lot of people ask, well, then what? After you've cleaned the silver, isn't it going to be exposed more to gases? Yes, it is, to oxygen and sulfur. So there's a huge debate among conservators anyway about whether to coat the silver or not coat the silver once you clean it. And on the pro side, if you do coat the silver with something like agatine, there's some different concoctions out there that have been used for decades in museums. It will last for several years and it will reduce the need for polishing. That's true. But the con side is that these coatings are not going to stay clear forever and they will discolor, and therefore they have to be removed and potentially replaced. So you're talking about you need a fume hood, you need people to do this. It's you need someone who's experienced, or else it can come out very uneven. So in this example here, I did have to remove a lot of discolored coatings from our Gorham silver collection because they had been coated by someone else way back when. I'm not really sure. I think about 1991. So about 30 years later, the coating was very yellow, and the silver metal actually really looked like brass or bronze. It didn't even look like silver. It needed to come off. You have to use acetone, which is not that much fun to work with. You should have a solvent respirator or a fume hood, or be doing it outside where there's good ventilation. So what do we do instead if we're not, you can tell I'm not a fan of coating. Um, so there are, other things that you can do. There's a material called corrosion intercept, and I'm showing it to you here. It's a really neat material. It's basically a polyethylene, like a baggie, something you would buy, a Ziploc baggie. But it has copper particles embedded in the polyethylene. And remember that noble scale of metals, copper is weaker. It's lower down on the scale. So if you were to put a nice polished piece of silver in a bag that you make, like you see here, Isabel's making these bags. If you put something that was freshly cleaned, polished into one of these bags, the silver is not going to tarnish. It's going to be protected by the copper embedded in these bags. And it's called like a sacrificial lamb, I guess. And so the only drawback is the curators often don't like these bags because you can't see through the bag to see what the item is. So what we did was we put these labels, as you can see here in the image, we put labels of what was in the bag, so that the curator would be able to identify, which pieces they were interested in accessing. So the corrosion intercept, you can buy it in bags, pre-made bags, but they're only in certain sizes. So what we did was we bought rolls of it and we made our own bags using this heat sealer, which you see in the upper left, and we made custom bags. But I really want to emphasize that I'm going to put the metal directly into the bag. I think it's very risky. You want to wrap your silver item, like you see in the center here, with acid-free tissue, and then put it into these copper wrappings, because there is a slight possibility over time, you're not always checking, that these bags could make some kind of a line. And I think you can see that in the center image here of this silver vessel that I'm showing. I think someone previously had wrapped this silver vessel in some kind of saran wrap, and it came from a private donor, and I think they were trying to keep it from being tarnished. And it really impacted the surface, and it was very difficult to polish that out. So fortunately at RISD, we have a lot of silver makers and artists who are very facile with working with silver surfaces. And sometimes I consult with the silver students about how to remedy some of these situations. Regarding storing of silver, we have an entire room that's just full of silver storage. We don't store anything else in there. The cabinets are powder coated enamel, they're called. And it's wonderful because powder coated means there's no off gassing of solvents. And that's one thing. If you were in the market for purchasing any new storage containers or storage furniture, or you were writing a grant for this purpose, you want to specify powder coated enamel cabinets, because they're state of the art, they're the best, and you really want the best for your silver collection because they're very sensitive. You also want to gasket the door so that there's no air infiltration from just the ambient air that's in the room. So you can gasket with like a silicone gasketing, very inert. And then as far as what you would layer on the shelves, we use a polyethylene microfoam. It's called Velara, and that's a very nice material. It's irradiated foam. It does no off-gassing. So again, no chemicals are entering into that air in the cabinet. So the cabinet air is quite clean, so to speak. We use Audi tested materials. Audi testing is something that has been done for years and years. It's named after Andrew Audi, who used to take care of the materials, of silver, at the British Museum. And these materials, if they're Audi tested, will reveal if they're good enough, basically, if they're clean enough for the silver to be in contact with. And so, and you usually store like metals with like, just so you don't get any galvanic corrosion interaction. So here's an example of metal storage. So after we polished, we started 3 years in advance, as I mentioned, because we had 1,200 pieces of silver to clean, and some of them were gigantic and some were very small. But we had to start 3 years in advance, and we had 90 volunteers. It was quite an effort, and then we would wrap the polished material in the corrosion intercept, because we didn't want to have to come back 2 years later and repolish. So that's what it looked like. And we would label the outside so that the curator knew, where everything was. And if she was looking for something, she could locate it. So, so that's the just to, recap, process, wrap and isolate the silver with acid-free tissue prior to inserting into corrosion intercept. I will say there's a little caveat with the corrosion intercept because it has a lifespan and I have seen it kind of deteriorate. And it's not stamped when you buy it. You don't know how old it is. You don't know when it was manufactured. And I've actually reached out to the company to see if they would stamp the material, but so far they won't. And so you would want to keep track of when you order corrosion intercept, what year, and you would want to kind of pay attention to its stability because sometimes it seems to crack up a little bit, literally. So, and when you're storing, let's see, when you're storing silver, you want to avoid wood because of the acid content, especially oak. I don't know if you have any oak cabinetry. Mahogany cabinetry is much better because it's much lower in acid content. But if you're applying if you have the money or you're applying for a grant, which I know are few and far between now, you would want to specify powder coated metal. Displaying silver, this is an example of how we display some of the silver at RISD in RISD Museum in a silver gallery. We were using glass shelves, very inert. We're using linen in the back, very inert. Um, and the only problem we get into sometimes is if, as you see here, some teapots, coffee pots have wooden handle, or they might have a leather wrapped handle. They might have ivory insulators. It's very common to see ivory used on the handle so that you can actually lift up the teapot without burning your hand, right? Because metal is a conductor of heat. So very often fine silversmiths would put ivory sort of um, little rings. I'm sure you're familiar with that on handles so that the person that's serving the coffee or tea doesn't have to hold a hot handle. But in most cases, we would probably want to err on 30 to 40% relative humidity again, because it's best for the silver. It will lower the speed with which corrosion will occur and tarnish. But if you have a lot of ivory or a lot of wood or a lot of leather on on a silver item that you're trying to display, you might have to compromise, more to 40, 45% relative humidity. So the safe materials to use for exhibition are very similar to what you would use in storage. Polyethylene, polypropylene, glass, linen, cotton, and polyester. Just in general, acid-free materials, so they'd be pH neutral, and formaldehyde-free materials because they're very acidic and would wreak havoc on your silver surfaces. And we're wrapping up here, but this is a very nice material that is also super inexpensive. 3M makes an anti-tarnish strip, and you can see here Tara, she's one of our registrars, holding a blue board cardboard strip on which we've attached some of these tarnish strips. They're made out of very fine charcoal, like charcoal paper. And charcoal is a wonderful adsorber and absorbs pollutants. And so that's something you could put in a case, especially if you haven't coated the silver, like we don't. And in the lower bottom right-hand corner, you see silica gel. So silica gel sachets are wonderful. They're a little bit more expensive, but you can reuse them over and over again. It's not something you throw out. I hope people realize that it's reusable. And so it's good value for your money to have silica gel and these anti-tarnish strips on hand. And finally, these are the resources I would recommend. These are some wonderful companies: Talus, University Products, Gaylord, Benchmark, and Small Core. These are all really terrific companies. If you're not familiar with them, I would go online and investigate them a little bit. And then I'm showing you here one of the rooms of the Gorham Silver exhibition, which maybe some of you saw in 2019 that we had at our museum. So thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Ingrid, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. You speak very clearly and authoritatively on this subject. And my first question is, do you speak on any other topics? And that maybe we could have you back again on
Oh,
something else.
oh, sure. Yes,
Okay.
I like to speak on plastics. A
Okay.
lot of historical societies don't realize how many plastics they have in their collection, the early plastics, right? Cellulose nitrate,
Uh-huh.
cellulose acetate. Is one of my favorite research
Oh,
topics.
good. We did have a talk on plastics, I think it was about a year ago.
Oh, good.
But we could have another one
Yeah.
at some point in the future. I'll just mention a couple things and then we'll open it up to other people. One of the first things that occurred to me when you were talking about silver was that there's a kind of a crossover with photographic conservation because so many photographs are silver based. For example, daguerreotypes are silver clad copper,
Mhm.
and they are very often found in cases that have a velvet insert that
Mm.
faces the daguerreotype. And so
Right,
it's
right.
very important to have the daguerreotype sealed with the glass so that not only outside air can get in, but also what might be coming from the that velvet plush that's inside the case. And that's something I had never thought about before until you mentioned that there might be some sulfur outgassing going on from velvet.
Right. And in the case of the wonderful um, set that I showed you, you wouldn't remove it's original. It's original to the set. I'm not proposing that you would remove it, but what you could do is put a sheet of acid-free tissue, say
Right.
between the silver and the velvet.
Yeah,
Yes.
so similar to interleaving
Yeah.
in a book or with photographs to protect them from something that's in contact with them. And also fingerprints, which you mentioned, is also an issue with silver-based photographs. We often see fingerprints on silver gelatin prints, and the same issues apply. I mean, when we talk about photographic conservation, we're always telling people, not to touch the surface of the image because of the silver and what you'll leave on there. I did a
Right.
talk on preserving photographs, and I have one of my illustrations shows, an image with a faint 19th century image with a faint fingerprint, and then digitally enhanced so that you can see it a lot better. And it's kind of the same thing that's going on. So then I'll just as far as other questions, I'll just ask you one more. And one thing that you didn't mention as a top possible cleaning technique was ultrasonic cleaning.
Hmm.
Is that something that
Hmm.
you have
I
ever
don't
done?
typically use that. It's probably, just thinking off the top of my head, it's probably fine. All right. Well, let me just back up one second. The reason why I'm such a advocate for the precipitated chalk method using the bamboo skewers and the cotton is because very often when you're cleaning something that's silver, you might only want to clean part of it, right? Maybe you want to enhance a certain part, but you don't want to clean the whole thing. Say there's Niello or something like that. If you were to ultrasonically, you'd have to dip it, right? And put it
Mhm. Right.
so it would be cleaned even throughout. Very
Mhm.
often we polish things unevenly. We polish them to bring out certain aspects and maybe not other aspects. That's
Mhm.
why these strip and dips that they sell in, the hardware store, on TV, you see advertised, and you dip your jewelry in and it comes out and it's just beautiful. It's yeah, it's dipping and it's stripping. It's treating everything the same. So there won't be any nuances. In the museum we're cleaning and we're trying to celebrate the nuances of
Mhm.
the artist, whatever they were creating, and not treat it like it's all the same. The surfaces, sometimes some are matte, some are supposed to be shiny, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You want to retain the artist's intentions, perhaps, or,
Yes.
or perhaps show that the object is old by leaving maybe a little bit of tarnish on it.
Yes. Yes,
Uh,
exactly. It doesn't have to be super shiny. In fact, I would guard against that, we don't always, you can polish and polish and polish. There'll always be a residue that comes off on your swab, right? We call it the cotton swab, because you're just abrading off the silver. It will never stop coming off. You'll
mhm,
never be done.
mhm.
So you have to, in consultation with your curator or your specialist or your stakeholder, you need to come to an agreement about what the surface should really look like.
How far to go?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I agree with you. I just wondered, you didn't mention that as one to avoid, so I thought I would just mention it since you didn't bring it up. But it sounds like, doing it by hand, you have a lot more control.
right,
The
exactly.
results is much more predictable. You can stop when you want it to stop. And
Hmm.
okay, we had a question in the chat. Is vacuum preferable to dusting or brushing?
Oh, vacuuming?
You vacuuming to
Yeah,
take the dust off before
sure.
cleaning.
Yeah, sure, that's fine. You can brush into a vacuum, that kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
We always like to cover the nozzle of the vacuum. I'm just saying, just in case no one realizes, but we always cover the vacuum nozzle with like a screening. You can get fiberglass screening, for instance, at Home Depot. It's not metal screening, it's fiberglass. So it's very soft, very inexpensive. You can buy it by the yard or whatever at Home Depot, and you can cut a little piece and put it over the nozzle so that just in case some part of your object falls off, you don't inadvertently suck it into the vacuum. We always cover. You can also use cheesecloth, something like that. Just cover the nozzle and tape around the perimeter of the nozzle.
Very
Yeah,
good. There's a question about how to contact you. I guess you could be contacted at the Rhode Island School of Design.
sure.
There's
Yeah.
probably a website that has your name on
Yes.
it with your contact information.
Yes.
Another question was, what's the best way to remove old polish residues from recessed areas on silver objects?
That is, it becomes like stone. It gets really hard. Yes. So I think the best way to do that is to um, probably use toothpicks. Put a little distilled water or ethanol or isopropanol, like the rubbing alcohol, and use toothpicks, or you could use a soft toothbrush, not the firm, but the soft one.
Mhm.
Sometimes, in fact, with the Gorham, we use dental floss. How about that? We found that there were some areas that we actually had to floss. Like there were these beads of silver, and there was all this old caked polish residue from someone else. I don't know. And we flossed like they were teeth. It worked great.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Do the 3M tarnish strips need replacing? If so, how often?
Yeah.
And can they be reused?
Yeah. So that's fortunately they're not that expensive. Charcoal is tricky because charcoal, like I said, has like a lot of surface area. And so it absorbs so many pollutants. But what happens is once it's, full up and absorbed as much as it can, it spews it out again, which is really bad. So can you tell when it's full? No, there's no indicator. And I would just say that depending on the air quality of your museum, whether you have an HVAC system or you don't, or you live in your museum's in an industrial area or it isn't, you could make maybe an educated guess, and maybe in our case for the Gorham exhibit, it was up for 6 months. So we used the strips. We didn't change them out after 6 months because we have an HVAC system, so the air quality in our museum is pretty good. But if you were next to some kind of industrial plant that was spewing out, a lot of pollutants or something like that, I would probably change them every month, that kind of thing. So I'm afraid there is no easy answer for that question.
I have a follow-up question to that with regard to these types of materials. Conservation Resources makes this paper that's impregnated with zeolites,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
a pollution intercept. Is that
Yes.
something that you would recommend to include perhaps in exhibit cases or in
Yes.
storage containers?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that zeolites. It's a great word, great Scrabble word. If you play that, no one will know what you're. Anyway, zeolites, they're like straws, like microscopic straws that are in the paper. Yes. And they absorb pollutants. And I agree. I think that's good value. You can buy those sheets in different sizes, and it's white, and it's not like it turns darker when it's old or used, but I think that's a good idea. Yeah, that'd be a very good
Mhm.
preventive measure. Yeah.
They also make cardboard boxes out of that same material
Oh,
for
yeah.
storage.
So
So
you
that
right, you could use those for
you
storage.
could
Yeah.
use those as
Hmm.
well.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, we got a few more questions here. One of them is we should say some of them some people want to contact you, which you may hear from some folks. What
Sure.
are the pros and cons of Pacific silver cloth use over corrosion intercept?
Yeah. So actually, Pacific silver cloth, is tried and true. It's very old. I mean, many people are probably familiar with it. It's a brownish, blackish kind of coloration, and I think it's fine to use Pacific silver cloth. My understanding, it has silver particles embedded in it. So again, it's So if you wrap a teapot in it, the idea, I think, is that the Pacific silver cloth with the silver particles are going to react first, and the item inside that you're protecting will be not oxidized. I don't think there's anything wrong with the Pacific silver cloth. I'm not sure what the cost is these days, per yard. I think some curators, again, you can't see through it, so but the curators just have to adjust to that, I think. So it's readily available, and that's a good material, Pacific Silver Club. Corrosion Intercept is newer. Um, it's does come in bags that you can buy, or you can make your own bags, like I mentioned with the heat sealer. It would be good to compare the cost. I haven't done that yet. Yeah, that's a very good question.
Ingrid, you mentioned about silver-plated materials and that if you clean them too often, the copper is going to start to show through.
Mm.
Do you have any sense of how often you can clean something before the copper starts to show through?
Well, partly it's how aggressive is the polisher, right?
Right.
If you're taking out your aggressions while you're polishing, it
Yeah.
depends. But I think it happens over years. I think
Mhm.
if you're polish, say if you're in a historic house, right, and you want to polish your silver candlesticks, um, maybe you're polishing them once a year for the 6 month season that we usually have in New England. You can experiment with waxing. I didn't really want to get into this, but you can consider, like with candlesticks, possibly applying a wax coating. Um, like Renaissance wax is a very
Mhm.
nice wax,
Mhm.
very thin layer, and then buffing it off.
Mhm.
Um, It's going to make them kind of slippery, but and also sticky. The problem is wax attracts dust, so you may not like that. But I would say polishing maybe once a year um, in a historic house setting. I would just go really light touch or use the rouge cloth, so you're barely removing any silver.
One of your slides mentioned don't polish your silver right before you store it, unless you're going to have an exhibit, and you're putting it in the bag first and
Yes.
protecting it. I thought that was an excellent point. I mean, there's no point in in doing it unnecessarily. You would polish it right before you take it out of storage,
Yes, I think
to
some
display
people
it.
think they should clean it before it goes into storage, but that is not necessary. Yeah,
That
yeah,
might be true for other types of material, but
right.
not for silver.
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody want to unmute and ask a question orally? Please feel welcome to do so. Otherwise, I think we've answered all the questions
Yeah,
right now.
great.
I'm going to give you a second to think. Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Okay, I'm going to just close the meeting by inviting those of you who are not members of the Princeton Preservation Group to consider becoming a member. Dues are $5 a year. Although our Zoom meetings are free and open to the public, we do have occasional members-only get-togethers in person, and we'd be delighted to have you join us. So with that, I want to thank Ingrid very much for this wonderful presentation, and thank the audience for attending. And I wish you all good health and future happiness. Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much. Great
Okay.
questions.
Okay. Take care, everyone.